What is up guys, it's your boy Soulbound here, back with another Wrath of the Lich King video. So today we're taking a trip down memory lane and looking at a couple of things that changed throughout Wrath of the Lich King to give you guys an idea of what Wrath Classic is actually going to look like. So we know that Classic is always based on the last patch of the expansion, or even a patch after the final patch, basically putting us on the most finalized version of the game possible, with all of the class changes of that patch. That being said, we also know that some systems that are introduced through the expansions actually don't get introduced at the launch, even though we are using the final patch, such as itemization in Classic, where the loot tables were completely shifted around in a specific phase, and more specifically TBC Classic, where we did not have the looking for group system available at launch, rather it came at a different phase. So with that said, which of these Wrath of the Lich King systems do you expect to come at launch, and which do you expect to come at a later date? Let me know in the comments down below as we go through them, and with that said, let's begin. So let's start with the most discussed Wrath feature, which is the Dungeon Finder. The Dungeon Finder was not actually originally implemented until the final patch of Wrath of the Lich King, or I guess I should say the final major patch, aka patch 3.3.0. So if we go by the original release schedules, the Dungeon Finder should actually not be out until the final phase of Wrath Classic, but personally I would love to see this come out as early as possible, as it is kinda pointless by the final phase. The only challenge that would come into play by releasing this earlier is that they have to adjust the random heroic rewards to give different emblems based on which raid or raid tier is currently out in each phase, but that is honestly such a minor issue that it shouldn't really be a problem at all. It is also worth noting that in the looking for group feature in TBC Classic, you can also search for raids and quest groups, and when the Dungeon Finder was introduced in patch 3.3.0, the raid search feature was moved to a separate raid browser interface, which became the looking for raid feature in Cataclysm. The ability to queue up to find groups for quests was also removed entirely, and wasn't reintroduced until way later, I think around Mists. So speaking of the Dungeon Finder, it is also worth talking about a change that came in patch 3.2, which allowed players to trade soulbound items in a 2-hour window. So with the Dungeon Finder, you already know someone is going to click need on something and then say, oops, misclick. So personally, I would love to see this feature being added at launch as well, especially if the Dungeon Finder is added at launch. Speaking of looting, the ability to roll Disenchant on an item while inside a dungeon group was also introduced in patch 3.3, and this should also come at launch, once again if the Dungeon Finder comes in at launch, but personally I want this to be in at launch regardless, so you can also roll Disenchant if you are running heroic dungeons, or anything else in phase 1 and phase 2. The earlier this quality of life feature is added to the game, the better. And hey, speaking of quality of life, if you're into gold making and you want to make as much gold as possible in Wrath Classic, check out my gold guide for Wrath of the Lich King Classic. This is a gold guide based on gold farms, gold making techniques and strategies, farming professions, crafting professions, and preparations and investments that can make you thousands of gold in pure profit. The support on this guide has been absolutely insane so far. I cannot thank you guys enough, and I'm so happy with the feedback that you've given me on it. So, and if you haven't actually checked it out yet, make sure you do so through the link down below, and use the code Soulheim for 50% off. Next up, raiding. Raiding was also reworked for Wrath of the Lich King, giving us both 10-man and 25-man raids, and what changed throughout the duration of Wrath was the difficulty modes of raiding. To begin with, we only had 10-man and 25-man raiding, where 10-man was actually considered normal raiding, and 25-man was often referred to and considered heroic raiding, based on the fact that putting together a 25-man group was actually more difficult, and the rewards were slightly better. Now that being said, in patch 3.2, Heroic Raids was introduced, so we now have 10-man normal and 10-man heroic, as well as 25-man normal and 25-man heroic. This is a change that I'm personally expecting to remain as it was in OG Wrath, which would mean we don't get access to Heroic Raids until Trial of the Crusader or the penultimate phase of WOTLK Classic. On the other hand, it would be very fun to see what Heroic Naxxramas would look like, as well as Heroic Ulduar, but Heroic Ulduar could conflict with the hard mode bosses. Dual Talent Specialization was also added in patch 3.1, and I would love to see this added at the launch instead. Just to mention one more thing that I personally would love to see change. I don't really see any reason why this should not be in at launch, so I'm actually expecting to see this at launch, and maybe even during the pre-patch. For professions, one thing I want to mention here is the Book of Glyph Mastery, which was originally introduced in patch 3.1, and it brought 50 new glyphs to the game that could only be learned from this book, and some of these glyphs are core glyphs for certain classes, and this should definitely be in at launch instead of patch 3.1, but then again, this is an itemization thing, and generally speaking, they have been basing itemization on the final patch so far, so I'm actually pretty much expecting this to be there at launch as well, but if it's not, then it should be there in the second phase. Now let's talk quickly about Battlegrounds, as there are two things to cover here, both of which I think should be available at launch, but one of them could be delayed to spread out the content a little bit. So first up, the Isle of Conquest Battleground was added in patch 3.2, a brand new 40 vs 40 battleground, which I don't think anyone actually enjoys doing, but those massive 40 vs 40 fights at the docks are actually quite fun. Battleground experience was also introduced in patch 3.2, effectively allowing you to level up alts with Battlegrounds, and this in particular is what I want to see in at the launch of Wrath. Mounts were also changed in patch 3.2, where the cast time was reduced from 3 seconds to 1.5 seconds, and the level requirement and the gold cost to train different types of mount riding was drastically lowered, allowing players to trade their first mount training at level 20 for just 4 gold. On top of all of this, you also have many different class changes and item changes, but once again, as Classic is based on the most finalized version, those things won't really change over time. What actually will change over time is quality of life, and for example in patch 3.3.0, which will also be the final phase of Wrath Classic, we do have some quality of life changes, specifically regarding professions, or reputations coming in, giving us plus 30% increased reputation gains with the native Northrend factions, as well as giving us the ability to exchange emblems for reputation. So yeah, those are a couple of things that changes throughout the duration of Wrath of the Lich King, and this can really impact what Classic WoW or Classic Wrath will actually look like based on when these changes are implemented in Classic. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please click that like button for me, and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.